You know, there was a moment, I was thinking about this the other day. I was reflecting on your wave versus my desire not to wave. And someone was talking to me about the millennium pause versus the like Gen Z, I don't know, in the middle of task. And I'm like, but if you're doing the same thing over and over leading into it, is that just like a moving millennium pause?
Oh, I'm hearing a little echo.
Oh no.
Oh, I think that's just on my end. But yeah, it might honestly
I'm going to call that the
yeah, I think that's we had a little bit of stream gremlins there. But yeah, I think that is indeed just a different version of the same thing. But hello and welcome to the Story Engine Workshop series, the series that we're airing weekly, in which we will be bringing on different creative guests and creative professionals who have expertise or specific passions that they want to share. We'll be interviewing them to find out how their brains work, what makes them tick, all the wisdom and the insight that they have to share, and then we're going to create something live on camera with them and with you, so we can actually see the creative process in action, because the creative process is so often something that happens privately, and I think we can learn so much by seeing how other brains think and other creatives operate and learning
and the Halifax Wi-Fi is coming to get Peter today.
Oh no, not again. It is starting to snow again.
Well, maybe this is a good time to say that's the person who would just bring in before he frozen was Peter Tchaikovsky, the founder of the Story Engine, hailing in from Halifax, which I guess is getting some form of cold snowmageddon again, and bringing you all the internet gremlins for that. I like how we're using the words gremlin a lot today, because I have a feeling that since we're doing a lot of role playing and world building, that like I feel like that actually could exist in some like fantasy world, that there's true internet gremlins and they're gremlins that swim on the internet. Anyways, that's Peter. I'm Miroki Tong. I'm the CEO of the Story Engine. I make sure the engine keeps chugging along, and I do all those fun little details like freight and logistics and numbers and stuff. And I promise you, they're very important when it comes to making sure that everyone can world build happily. This is Eric.
Hello. I am the community manager of the Story Engine. I write emails, do some of the creative development, and handle socials and other various odds and ends. If you've talked to somebody from the company, it's probably me.
And am I back and am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. It is interesting. A number of the audience members are actually saying that you're fine and alive. So apparently it only is going to impact us, and it's meant to play jokes on us the entire time. The gremlins want to make us uncomfortable, while the rest of the world's like, everything's fine. I don't know why Miroki's just sitting there saying things aren't fine. She's insane.
Great. Well, we have asymmetric tech gremlins. And what a day to have those, because we have a professional streamer as our guest. So this is a wonderful first impression to be making. But friends, today we are going to get to learn about the process of player-driven world building from Diana Fay, or at Diana of the Rose. She is a tabletop gaming content creator, a podcast host, a streamer, model, social media consultant, performer, and panelist. She creates long and short-form content with the goal of inspiring people from all walks of life to explore themselves through gaming. And she recently launched Worlds Apart, a TTRPG world building podcast that you can find as at Worlds Apart TTRPG on social media. So please join us in welcoming Diana Fay. Yay!
Hello! Yay. Oh, so happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's honestly perfect timing. Like, Worlds Apart just came out. It's literally all you guys do. I honestly am so stoked about it. This is fantastic. I'm excited to be here.
We felt the intersections, like the world collided in the most perfect way at the perfect time, and the time-space continuum interacted. I know one thing Peter didn't say when he was doing your introduction to, that I know I personally felt connected to when bringing you on the stream today, was also the kind of work you do to make TTRPGs kind of more accessible and into the like Latina, like Latinx, like queer community.
Yeah.
And as a BIPOC Asian woman who queer in the space, it was like one of those things. I'm like, we don't see enough of this. We don't see enough people, even if we are BIPOC or more marginalized in the space, advocate for others in that space. So that like kind of really touched me in a personal way. So I wanted to kind of shout that out and thank you for doing the work you do.
Oh, thank you. I know that was like one of the first things we emailed about is it's like, wait, you're a person of color? I'm a person of color. We're both in a really, we're both, oh my God, we're both here. This is fantastic. Yeah, it's getting a lot better. I'm proud of where the community has come or how far the community has come when it comes to things like that. But definitely, especially in the Latin space, it's like, oh wow, it's me and like maybe 3 other people that I can count. So I'm doing my best because really tabletops have such a positive impact on people when it comes to mental health, when it comes to like being able to explore themselves, creativity, the fun of it, making new friends. And so it's good to get it into as many spaces as we can. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's hard, like when it is a space that maybe in the past has always had certain barriers. So then people have already self-selected them out. And so you have to kind of be like, this is fun, guys. Like you should actually come and do this thing. And there's this really great organization called VGC USA and Video Games USA, and they actually use gaming to kind of like help young, like youths, like usually kids in high school and the like, develop more social skills and find community through games. And I'm like, dang, I wish there were more entities like that when I was younger, because I can say as a socially awkward teenager who didn't feel like I could find my community, that could have probably been really helpful to, you know, making me not the like mumbling pile of awkwardness, or I wasn't a mumbling pile of awkwardness. I was a very loud pile of awkwardness, but it was awkward all the time.
Amazing. I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, well, why don't we roll right into kind of getting a chance to know you a little bit more and who you are. Like, tell us about how you got into tabletop RPGs, how you brought those talents to video, social media, and all the other creative space you work in. Because I know I buried the lead by diving right into what I stand you in.
No, it's great. Yeah. Oh my God, my origin story. I love telling this story. So I always grew up as like an avid reader. I was one of those kids who absolutely blasted through the summer reading programs at my local library every single year. And so I got a lot of exposure to a bunch of different, like, I guess, styles of world building in that sort of sense. And all these sort of, especially fantasy type like worlds and all these fantasy creativity bits and pieces throughout my childhood. And that grew into a love of video games. And then from there, a friend when I was in like high school was like, hey, have you ever played D&D before? And I was like, I've never even heard of D&D. This was right when 5th edition came out. So I was like, I've never heard of it before. Critical Role hadn't really gotten enough of a popular upswing that it had changed the fundamental, you know, landscape as much as it has now. And so my friends were like, okay, that's fine. We need another person though. So how about you go watch Critical Role, follow this YouTube tutorial on how to make a character. Don't read anything else when it comes to like the D&D handbook, and then be here next Friday. And I was like, okay, I guess I could do that. And once it came down to rolling dice for the first time and kind of getting into the concept of like how free you can be with your character choices and how much like as a player you can shape the world and shape your outcomes and things like that, like it was like a choose your own adventure book on steroids. And I was so into it and so excited about it. And then I made it my entire personality for the past decade. So now I'm here. And I teach people kind of the easy, lazy ways into world building, into tabletop games, into kind of breaking into the space and having, because really it's play, it's having fun. Everyone should do it. It's great. It's fantastic. And I know there's a lot of barriers to it, especially when it comes to like buying the books for the first time. They are pricey as hell. You know, things like when people feel like they can't be creative and things like that. And I'm here to tell people that no, you don't have to be like an author to come up with a cool story. Like here's some shortcuts, here's some cool ways that you can like world build while your players are doing most of the work for you, which is what this show is going to be about. And yeah, things like that. So I give people shortcuts essentially.
Sweet.
I think shortcuts are so important because I know it's really fascinating to me sometimes when we are at conventions where I say to people like, do you play? Are you creative? And they're like, I'm not creative at all. They're like, I don't. And I'm like, we are all like, you know, at some point it's not like when we were 3 years old or 4 years old that we at any point in our lives were like, and then we just don't create. Like, I don't think I've met one 3-year-old that didn't have some sort of idea and imagination. So I always wonder where did it end, or where did we sell ourselves that narrative that we can't create? So I like the idea that you're finding ways to break that down for folks.
Oh yeah. And I promise I'm the least creative person on the planet. I'm so wildly type A. Like I was a science major growing up. I work in a field that's very heavily regimented. I never did any sort of art. I don't even sing in the shower. So creativity is at a 0 here. And I promise you, you don't need any to get into what we're doing here.
I feel like
Yeah,
we're
I'll
going
say,
to see
like,
far less than 0.
Yeah, and I here's my theory. I'm calling my shot for the rest of this live stream and episode here, because it's something that I think we've seen at conventions, and people are like, I'm not creative, and then we'll do a prompt with them anyway, because we want people to get to try, you know, the deck at conventions, and they'll have like really interesting insights, and they'll make really interesting interpretations, and they'll connect dots in a way that my brain never would have, and they'll end up with like a little piece of a story. So I feel like, yeah, people will start to tell themselves that, and then the moment you put in front of them the chance to make creative connections, like, humans can't help it. Like, our brains do that. We love divergent thinking. We're so good at it. It's one of the evolutionary things about our species that's like so cool and interesting and weird. And
It's how we survived.
yeah,
How we got here today.
Yeah.
The amount of imagination it takes to make fire.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah, and decide that we want to eat eggs.
Speaking of fire and sparking ideas, I was really excited to see someone else who talks about the idea of player-driven world building. It's sort of a bent that I've been getting on recently as I've been exploring it more, and a friend did a bit of world building for a session really tailored for my wife and I recently, and then I tried it with some friends. In both cases, it was so much fun. It was different from what I've been used to as a DM. So could you tell us a little bit about what is player-driven world building, and why is it a tool that some DMs might want to consider adding to their toolbox?
Yeah, so the way I think of player-driven world building is it's world building for people who don't want to world build. I consider it to be like the lazy shortcut to world building, because really you're taking the strong, the plot points, the NPCs, the major themes of your world, and you're asking the players what they want to get out of the world instead, and kind of putting the ball in their court. So if you have players who are really into like mysteries, for example, or they're really into like horror and they play a lot of horror video games or watch a lot of horror movies, then you know, okay, well, if I want this person to be happy at my table and I want them to have a good time, I know to take that direction. And that's one less decision you have to make. Same with when it comes to tabletop role-playing games. If you ask a player like, oh, okay, like I see you have a character who's a barbarian and you grew up in a specific clan that had like these traditions. Okay, well, like who was your mentor growing up? Like who taught you how to do all these things? Who taught you all these traditions? Asking those sorts of questions and kind of like pulling on that string a little bit gets them to then tell you exactly everything you need to know about some NPC that you previously had to build. You know, they tell you, oh yeah, my old mentor, his name was Joe Barbarian Son, and this is what he looked like, this was his disposition, things like that. And you're like, oh, okay, great, that's fantastic. And you're just writing that all down off to the side. That's all it is. It's putting the ball back in the player's court and crafting your experience of world building and their experience of playing around them and what they want.
And speaking of crafting experiences around kind of what the players want, the chat, by the way, you are our players in this game that is this live stream. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, stuff that you'd like to see us talk about, please do feel free to share questions for Diana in the chat, and we'll circle back to those at various points as we continue talking. But in the meantime, so if I can ask, what are some of the ways that the worlds that you've built with players, or that worlds that DMs might build with players, turn out differently than the ones that you'd create if you were operating totally solo?
Oh man, the thing about operating solo, and especially when it comes to someone who, again, I state that I'm not a creative person, I tend to fall into the same sorts of patterns of world building and story crafting over and over again. So I am at my core a GM who works off of like horror games. I tend to write a lot of horror stories. Almost every character and creature that I build has some sort of horrifying aspect to them. And that's fine, nothing wrong with that. But like you do it for the 12th time, 13th time, your players are going to get a little bit bored. And so I find that player-driven world building really helps pull me out of that, like doing the same thing over and over again in a different font. It really forces you to kind of, like I said before, kind of tailor things to them a little bit and try and think about how you can take your style of world building and kind of apply it as a coat of paint over the story that they want to hear. So it's definitely like more diverse, I would say, and it provides a lot more variety of experiences. Plus, when my players help me build a world and help me kind of deal with like the NPCs and the side quests and the themes that they want to see, then even when I'm not taking those players and that specific group and working with them, you know, let's say I've run a full campaign and I've built my world and the campaign around those players, I can then just fully recycle everything that they taught me and everything that I world built with them into the next campaign and have it as like side quests or potential NPCs, little Easter eggs, you know, the next group can run into. And so it's kind of a world that automatically iterates upon itself and automatically builds upon itself and just provides so much more diversity and so much more like just threads to follow.
Yeah, for sure. And as Maureen's saying, it sounds like a win-win situation for the players and the GM, which I think it is. The question I had, I feel like you already answered it in some ways, but I'm going to try and pivot it just slightly, because I was going to say originally, like, if you ever find your goals kind of contradict or like conflict with what your players want, and you were saying how you build horror-based worlds and you build many of them, then suddenly your players say, well, I don't want this anymore. Like, is it one of those situations, do you find that you create, like, I guess maybe there's a couple of ways. How do your players usually let you know that they're not satisfied with your work anymore? And how do you navigate that, especially if you're like, well, I've already created this world, we want to do this session, what do you want me to do? Like, now we're stuck in an impasse. Are we going to lose our entire play day because like you decide you don't want my world? How do you navigate a situation like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, going from the beginning, getting feedback from your players is not easy, because a lot of times players are like, they feel lucky to be at the table. And even if it's not their ideal experience, sometimes they won't feel okay speaking up. No matter how many times you say like, hey guys, you can DM me at any time, you can text me at any time. If anything goes awry, please let me know. Sometimes they won't do it. So one thing that I recommend all GMs do and all world builders do when you're playing at a table like this is to make sure you have mid-game check-ins, almost like a session 0, but like halfway through a campaign or a quarter of the way through a campaign, where you just set up a meeting. You're like, hey guys, fill out this little survey. Let me know how the game is going so far, what motivations that your player character might have that you haven't realized yet that you want to chase down. What are some themes that you want that you haven't seen yet? What are some themes that you've seen that you absolutely hate and never want me to mention again? If you want me to burn a certain chapter of my like lore book that I wrote for my world, let me know. I'll do it. I won't do it, but like I'll leave it out of the story.
I have 300 pages just about spiders, and I've got somebody who's terrified of spiders.
Yeah, right? It's like, okay, I guess I'll just Control F, find and replace every word spider with the word cat or something. And then,
why does that cat have 8 legs? Oh my god!
These spiders suddenly got a lot furrier.
Yeah, right.
Why do these spiders have 8 eyes, 8 legs, 8 tails?
So things like that, where it's like you kind of encourage your players every once in a while, periodically, to check in with you and make sure things are going well. If you find that things are diverging a lot, I tend to have this personal rule where no matter what, I lean more towards what the players want more so than what I want. And this is something that I feel like needs to be more popular in the space. A lot of people think like, oh, this is my table, I'm going to run it how I want. And like, if you want to play, great. If you don't, go find someone else. And it's like, that's not fun for anyone. That's when you get into like the railroading style of GMing in its core. And so instead, whatever the players say, I try and go with. If they have a certain plot that I feel like I can take, if they say, oh, I actually hate horror modules, I really like, mystery and intrigue, then I'll just dial up the mystery and intrigue in my horror module, dial down all the gore and things like that, and then reskin it and pretend that I came up with it completely originally for them and that it's a full new thing as opposed to a re-gifted story. So I try and lean towards what they want.
Have you ever had requests from player first where there's something where like it was pretty far from your like interest list? And it doesn't need to be like so big. Like I know for me, like when I'm DMing, I really don't like doing long technical episodes where like we're buying all of our supplies and we're counting our gold pieces and we're making sure we've used up enough rat. Like that's the stuff that as a DM I know that I bounce off of. So players who like want that, I don't think I'm the DM for them. And it's not a like get out of my table. It's like I don't know if I'm going to be able to give you what you want here. So like how do you handle those
on
types
their
of requests?
own, so I don't have to give them a severance package.
Right.
Yeah.
I thankfully have not had too many issues with that when it comes to my player characters, but I know it's definitely a problem where people come in and they want a heavy roleplay campaign, and then someone else on the other side of the table wants a heavy, combat campaign, things like that. I personally struggle with political intrigue, can't stand it, hate like long conversations and diplomacy in my tabletop games. I'd like to just go around and do fantasy stuff. And so I think for the most part, I tend to make sure I treat almost every episode as every session. Sorry, this is where we get into like the AP side of things. I'm very used to episodes where I prime the players as to what this particular session is going to be about. I'm going to be like, okay, guys, this is going to be a combat heavy session, but next time we're going to do what you want next. We're going to have this diplomacy style session next week, and things like that. And I kind of make sure that my players know that what they want is on the horizon, but that's not going to be this episode. It's going to be the next episode. And I kind of try and make sure that everyone's interests are served in some way or another in a full 4-hour session, so they don't feel like they're being, everyone takes turns almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Almost like the spotlight sharing is also sharing the whatever mode of storytelling we're in at any given moment, exploration or socialization or discovery or whatever it's going to be. I hear that.
You find I know, Peter, you have a really great question to ask, but I want to follow up on this about players and spotlights too, because one thing I find sometimes though is that there are players who not necessarily love the spotlight and they like being taken along for a ride. Because I've definitely met people also at conventions who are like, we have no interest in DMing or GMing ever. Like, we just want to show up, right? And I'll be like, great, the deck is for the GM in your life then. But I find that to that regard, then sometimes it's like they might not necessarily want to be in that spotlight, but I can also see the dynamic happening where it's like they don't want to be in the spotlight, but then they're noticing other players stepping up and being in the spotlight. And now there's like a moment of like, oh, well, I'm the one player who is like far, far, far back in the room. And I don't know if there's like a certain etiquette of how to navigate that.
Oh man, that's kind of where the GM has to step in a little bit. And again, that's where these mid-game check-ins kind of pop in as well. One thing that I like to ask players during my mid-game check-ins is, what are some goals that you have as a party member or that you might not have realized yet? Or do you have new goals as opposed to how you were at the beginning of the campaign? Like, how have things changed? And so I can kind of like, especially if they haven't taken much of the spotlight up till that mid-game session point or mid-game check-in point, I can be like, okay, we've done everyone else's story arcs. I'm going to take this really niche thing you said in a throwaway sentence during your mid-game check-in, and I'm going to make it a whole character arc for you. And so it's really up to the GM to kind of like point the spotlight at them, as long as they're cool with that. If someone really enjoys just being in the background and being a support character, that's fine. I won't force them into it. But if they're feeling a little bit anxious and a little bit shy, that's one way I like to do it. The other way I like to do it is I like to make sure that the character in question has information about the story that no one else has, which goes back to this player-driven world building thing, right? Let's say that the main campaign has something to do with a BBEG who is, a wizard classic at the top of a tower who has been terrorizing the countryside from, their high horse and their high tower. Maybe I can make it so that wizard's apprentice is a cousin of the person who hasn't taken a lot of the spotlight yet. And it's like, oh, okay, this person now has this key potentially to navigating this storyline. Like, this person has information that everyone else needs. And it's up to them to share it. It's up to them to take point when it comes to talking to this apprentice. And in conversations, maybe they should be taking the lead a little bit. So kind of giving everyone in the party a key to the story that needs to be shared and making them feel like the main character and making them feel like this vital part of the world for once, I guess.
Yeah, giving people stakes in the world and connections to the world is such a good way to do it, and like add that natural like impetus to participate. Yeah, love that. And we had a question earlier. What is this? In case you're coming in late, we are doing a live stream about the concept of player-driven world building. Player-driven world building is using your bringing your players into the creative process as you create your world, create your story, and figuring out how they can be involved in that process, because it reduces your workload as a dungeon master and it increases their buy-in, and it's just great for everyone. And we're having special guest Diana Fay at Diana of the Rose talk to us about it. By the way, if you want to learn more about Diana's work as a dungeon master, actual play performer, all these many things, you can follow Diana at Diana of the Rose and at Worlds Apart TTRPG, her new podcast about world building. Lots of places to find her. And actually, we'll quickly throw a question to the chat here for a moment. Chat, what is your connection to tabletop RPGs like? Do you have a particular edition that you play, a game that you play, a world that you play in? And if you don't play tabletop RPGs, because I know we have a lot of people who are authors and writers in the chat, let us know like what you think of them, or if you were going to try one, what you'd like to try. We'd love to hear about what your sort of connection to tabletop RPGs is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, something that I find to be like a challenge both as a player and as a DM. I have ADHD. I like the way that I pay attention can change in different social contexts. I find sometimes it's hard for me to keep track of the details of the Dungeon Master's world or keeping up with the story. Like, I'll need the reminders when I'm a player. When I'm a DM, I'm often worried about losing my players' attention. So do you have any tips for keeping people's attention on the world, or like how to be able to communicate information about the world in a way that's like friendly to different attention spans? And that goes double for online situations where I find like I have an even harder time paying attention.
Oh, yeah. Online situations, it's really tough. I play mostly online as an actual play performer and live play performer. So I'll get to that in a sec, because that's a bit of a special circumstance, but it's a very real problem. I love this question. I actually just made a video about it, I think yesterday, if not the day before, about how to navigate this. Because the thing is, when you create worlds, you're creating like paragraphs and paragraphs of descriptions and lore for different players, NPCs, locations. Someone enters a building for the first time and you want to go off on like this 3-minute monologue about like the walls and what they're made of, or like the molding that attaches the walls to the ceilings on via the pillars, things like that. In order to avoid monologuing, in your notes, try and make sure that you're taking it piece by piece and allowing breaks in this little monologue in this 3-paragraph section or whatever, this 3-paragraph description for the players to react to it. So let's say, for example, you're walking into a cathedral to some god for the first time. The party walks in and all you're going to describe, you're not going to go through like the entire building and its history and the Sistine Chapel and every single little bit of detail in the ceiling or anything like that. Instead, you're just going to describe the entrance. You're going to describe who's standing nearby within like a 10-foot radius of you. You're going to describe the lighting, the door and the sound that it makes as it shuts behind you. And then from there, wait for the party to walk further into the building before you describe what's further in the building. Same when it comes to NPCs, you make sure that if they're walking down the aisle of this cathedral and they're approaching a priest from behind, only describe the behind visible portion of that priest, their hairstyle, their clothing, their stance, things like that. And then wait for the party to react. Wait for someone to take charge and go, okay, I'm going to tap this person on the shoulder. And then once they tap them on the shoulder and the priest turns around, that's when you describe things like their disposition, their facial expression, the holy symbol that's on their chest, things like that. And then, so you want to like feed them little bits at a time the information and make sure that they're reacting to it and revealing new information through their actions as opposed to you just dumping it all at once. Later on, they might go up and start talking to the priest and, say like, hey, we have this mission for you. Like, come with us. If you come with us, if you want to live. And the priest goes, yeah, sure. And then the priest will then turn around, pick up like a sword and shield that was at their feet. And that's when you describe like their sword and their shield. You don't do it all at once. Wait for it to become relevant and then describe it. Same with your player too. Like when I introduce my player character for the first time, I try and make sure that I just talk about their physicality first. And then, at some point, I don't describe their weapon or their shield until they actually get into combat. I don't describe like their little fidgety habits until we're having some sort of campfire moment. Things like that. I make it feel like players are just noticing things as they go along and as they're getting to know this person.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for that information coming to people in a context where it means something as opposed to just kind of, here's data about my character.
It reminds me a lot like writing, right? Like that's the same thing we do as writers and authors, to not just give exposition whenever we're world building, especially if you're doing something in the speculative fiction realm, whether it's science fiction or fantasy, where you have to explain something. You don't want to just load right into, it's like you turn the page and it's like, now let's just talk about this world and this scene and this human being, right? And it's like you get tired as a reader. You let these things drip. And I think that's like something, it's actually interesting because I never really thought about it from a DM's perspective before, but it looks like there's some very similar foundations there.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And speaking of kind of the art of world building as a writer, and which is something that you have talked about, and the art of world building as a DM. Do you find that the kinds of worlds that you build and the way that you build worlds changes when you're doing it for like building something that's sort of just for you, or maybe eventually for readership, versus something that is going to be more of like a playground for players to do stuff in?
Oh man, I feel like when it comes down to like a playground for players to do stuff in, you can leave so much more stuff open-ended. Like I feel like when you're world building for writing, you kind of have to have all of the details for yourself. You have to describe like, oh my gosh, everyone's reaction to everything. You have to have it in mind, all these full-on character dossiers of how people's personalities are and things like that. And I feel like when you're used to a tabletop type setting, you can improvise and react to the players based off of what their expectations of the reaction might be. And so that back and forth kind of helps you build the world as you go along. And so again, it's like the lazier form of world building is letting your players do it for you. So that's why I prefer it personally, but I'm also not much of a writer.
I know someone who is an engineer on a gaming streaming project where they were basically trying to do a study to see if we use some of the CPU for eye tracking where people are looking, and we rendered those parts of the screen in higher resolution and not others, would it be a better use of streaming data? And I think about this a lot when I think about, like, I'll tell my players, wherever you look in the world, I will render that in higher resolution. Yeah. So the notes that I'm going to have on like any given town are very low res. They're good enough that like if you're not looking at it, sure, that's a town. the moment you look at it, I'm going to start trying to render that. So, what players pay attention to tends to become the way that I will govern my resources for like where I'll pay attention for building and providing detail.
Oh yeah,
Very
and
much
you
like
can even. Yeah, I mean, I was
Okay.
gonna say you could also ask your players like what they're gonna do next. Do not be afraid to like spoil it a little bit. You can go up to a player after a session and be like, "Hey guys, so you're in a town. Like, what do you think your next quest is going to be? Please tell me so I can make sure that quest is actually fully written out." Because if they tell you where they're going, it benefits you, so you know what to prep, and it benefits them, so they will have a better story at the end of it. So
yeah, you don't want your tabletop RPG to resemble like a video game one, where when they move the characters off the screen, they're now all just like snap tea, like frozen things in the corner. And when you turn your head to go look, it's just like a little frozen weird world, and you're like, oh no, because they never rendered it properly.
Yeah.
Before we go to our last question, I did see a question that I know Eric very helpfully answered in the chat, but a story engine deck question just for anyone who is joining us and is not super familiar. Maybe you're here because you know Diana and you love her and you want to come and see her, and you're like, who the heck are these random bozos who are hanging out with Diana today? Is there any overlap between the different products or all the different decks unique? And it's actually a pretty good question, because I think even if you're familiar with our decks, where we've done 3 major decks at this point, a whole plethora of expansions and boosters. We have our core story engine deck, which is our deck of character-driven prompts for storytelling. We have deck of worlds, which is the one we're going to be playing with mostly today, which is our deck for world building prompts. And then we have our brand new shiny Lore Masters deck that we just finished fulfilling our latest crowdfunder for, which is for weaving big, intricate lore clusters, helping you render the world in higher resolution, so to say. And then for all those decks, we have expansions, whether it's for building like expanded worlds, whether you want like something that's like more desert driven or more watery, or whether you want to like dig into little like keyholes of culture. And we have like boosters where if you want to get hyper specific in the genres for story engine. So if you like horror, say Diana, we also have like eldritch horror and gothic horror, so we can get really granular with that. So I hope that helps you a little bit. And of course, you can always visit our website, storyenginedeck.com, if you want to kind of look at each of those things with a little bit more details, because we have lots and lots of resources to kind of help you figure out how to get started. So Diana, so like the final question I have for you at least is, I feel like I buried the lead, but maybe we're about to find out more. What are some of your favorite fictional worlds, and what do you like about them?
Oh man, I'm very famous for being absolutely in love with the Elder Scrolls universe. The Skyrim was one of the first video games that I really like fully played through, and the Elder Scrolls has been out for so long. And one of the things that I absolutely love about it is how canon everything is. They pay such close attention to the way that the world has changed since like the 80s when the game first came out, the original Elder Scrolls 1 Arena. And now we're headed towards 6, maybe eventually we'll get there. And the world really hasn't changed all that much. You look at the map for the Elder Scrolls 1 and it's the same locations that you know and love from the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim. And looking at the world and how it's changed too, they really have a lot of lore in the books that you can find and pick up and actually read through in game. Back in, I think it was Elder Scrolls 3 or 4, they had this thing where you could have a fly spell, and it kind of broke the game a little bit. You could just fly all around the world, and then they got rid of it in 4 or 5. And in the world, they canonized that. They said like, oh yeah, there's this institution that outlawed this type of magic, so that's why you can't fly anymore. It's like, obviously it was just too game breaking, but still they took that extra effort to make it canon. And especially when it comes to like the choices that have been made throughout the story and the different endings that you could have had in the different games, those different endings have ramifications for each subsequent game. And I just love that sort of, again, that multiple choice, like, choose your own adventure type thing sings to my heart as someone who loved choose your own adventure books growing up. Like, I was the kid who went through and read those books and bookmarked every single like intersection and then went back to them. So I got every single ending. So I love that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
and I try and make sure that what I do is
too.
canon. Yeah, man. I should have known that I had an anxiety disorder way sooner.
If you have not checked out Ryan North's book Romeo and or Juliet and To Be and or To Be and or Not to Be are his two choose your own adventure Shakespeare books, but I think it was the Hamlet one, the To Be or Not to Be, where it shipped with a bookmark that has like 8 different teeth on it, basically like a comb, so you could bookmark the entire book basically, or like fork and save your different decision trees at various points in the story with one bookmark and like hold it in place. I think it was more like just a funny gimmick. I think it's actually hard to keep it in place for the whole thing, but it was a very neat way to acknowledge the fact that all of us are kind of like jamming our fingers in a bunch of pages and trying to like hold our last few save states, so to speak, in the game, and are like afraid to commit to things.
I love that so much. I'd never heard of that before. That's so cool.
They're fun books.
Is it Borderlands? That's the one where you have like the opportunity to end your story in like the absolute worst way possible based on the choices you make in the game.
I mean, there's a few that kind of fit that description.
I don't know. I just remember my brother, like this is my brother telling me these stories. So, and this was a long time ago when he was a teenager, but he was telling me that like this character's arc in this video game he played could, you know, end like everything from heroically to in between to also being like the most like pariah character at the end based on like bad decisions, like sacrificing other people or whatever. And I remember him telling me these stories, and I regularly think to myself, I'm like, who is sociopathic enough to go there? And then like every time I meet a person who does, I'm like, oh, you are that person who are because like I was like raised as like good kid, right? And like this is like no shade to anyone who tries these stories. This is more like it's very interesting how much our life experiences guide us into the decisions we make when we do these choose your own adventures things, because I think like the person in me who's always been raised for like happy endings, being a good child, would never go and play with something like of this nature because it would just feel too personal to me. Like,
oh yeah,
you know, I would
like, feel bad sacrificing an NPC.
Yeah, like I would just feel horrible all the time, right? It's like the whole thing about like letting your, you know, it's like the, you know, when Yellow game came out for Pokemon, and you know they had Pikachu follow you around, and it was like, who's the person who puts their Pikachu in a Pokeball? Right. Yeah. And you're like not supposed to, like it's a horrible thing. You're not supposed to. You have to get your Pikachu to like you. You don't put Pikachu in a Pokeball. Like I would.
That was a very no one puts baby in the corner, no one puts Pikachu in the Pokeball.
Right.
Yeah. And we had a wonderful comment here from Country Boy, who wants to play solo RPGs with the idea of using it to write fiction. And I'll just mention that we actually 2 weeks ago we had Claire Marshall on the Story Engine Workshop live stream to talk to us about using solo RPGs as a tool for writing or just for fostering your own creativity. And you can find that episode in our live history. That's the link there in the chat in case you want to check it out.
Check it out after you're finished with this episode, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, cue it up. Add to your watch later.
Yeah, you can always find us on our YouTube, and if you don't want to miss any of our future live streams, because I do believe we have a couple more coming up, you can always hit notify on the YouTube links themselves.
Yeah,
that was a very terrible description.
Well, I think we have spent some time talking about the theory of player-driven world building, but the fun thing about the Story Engine Workshop is that we actually do the stuff we talk about. So we're going to try some player-driven world building. So what's about to happen is we are going to bring out the heart of the cards, which is our little screen here where we can see cards being drawn. And Diana is going to do some Deck of Worlds world building prompt based world building. But first, we are going to introduce player personas. We are each going to take on the role of a certain kind of player, introducing our like predilections, our interests, things we do and don't like. And then Diana will kind of guide us through how she would world build for this particular party, for these particular players, for this particular table, so we can see what it looks like to kind of navigate those preferences in real time. And if you have any questions about what's happening, if you have any thoughts you want to share, let us know in the chat. There's a chance for you guys to join in and participate, but otherwise, we will get started.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to kind of lay out the groundwork a little bit, because I know this might be a little bit different than how we normally do our live streams, and Diana can choose to engage in this or not. So historically, when we've done some collaborative world building or character building together with chat, we've sometimes asked chat to vote. So out of the prompts, we kind of let them duke it out a little bit, so to say. And if you want to pick, that is totally okay. We can go democracy this time. But if you want chat to,
how about
let them have it.
How about chat is the fourth player at the table? So we'll introduce our 3-player personas, and then chat is the 4th player. And as you're asking what we want, every now and then you can throw a question to chat, and we'll try and incorporate chat's preferences there.
But if you do want chat to pick at any given point, all you have to do is give them the options, and then you have to count them down from 3, 2, 1, go, because they usually have the answers queued up, and then everyone smashes their enter button as violently as possible to get it's usually first to 3. So I thought I would let everyone know in chat today that Diana might pick some of the prompts, or she might allow you to pick some of the prompts, and we'll see where it all takes us.
Cool.
Lovely.
So I guess without further ado, we will all introduce our character personas. So I am going to be player A, and I'm someone who loves epic fantasy worlds, and I just want lots of like magic and fantasy, and I really want to be a spellcaster because I just want to be these characters I play. Like I've been really watching WandaVision a lot, and I just finished Agatha all along, and they're just such like powerful women, and I just want to be like them. They're just so OP, and they're just like down with the patriarchy. Okay, I can just have my own power. But look, like I don't need to get too technical about it because it's just like look at these ladies. They're so OP. They just cast things. Like Agatha calls her magic the purple. We don't know how the purple works. She just sucks everyone's magic and she's just super powerful. Okay. So I want the innovation because I think it's cool how they use their stories. Like, you know, Wanda being able to use her magic so much that she actually created her own world. But I don't want to get too hung up on the details. Okay.
Cool.
Wonderful. Welcome to the table, player A.
I am player B. I love playing a big, sweaty, meaty tank. But I just want to hit things. I'm not really a huge fan of roleplay. I don't want to be asked what my character thinks about things. I just want to explore cool places, fight cool monsters, uncover cool secrets, and I'm not super fussed about where my character fits into this world. I just want things to be cool. Don't want to argue too much about rules. I am a dwarf barbarian. I've got a big axe. I want to hit things with it. And that's where we're going to leave it. My favorite world is One Piece because, frankly, why wouldn't it be yours as well?
I should say our player personas are fictional most of the time, but not always.
Yeah.
There are some real world details mixed in there. Awesome. Well, I'm player C. I love political intrigue. I take copious notes every session, and I love social roleplay. I don't mind combat, but I'm much more interested in how the combat is going to affect the story and the placement of different characters and plots in the world. So it needs to be more than a slugfest for me. I want to know why I'm fighting, what I'm fighting for. My favorite fictional worlds are Middle-earth from Lord of the Rings and Westeros from A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones. And I'm thinking I'm going to play some kind of elf rogue who's a very like social rogue kind of character. And then chat, you are player D. So if you want to put in the chat some things that you like experiencing when you play role-playing games or what you'd be interested to see in a world or in a story that you play, let us know some of those details in the chat, and we'll see what we can do about using those. Or rather, we'll throw to our DM here, Diana, to try to deal with all that.
So I am going to have a slight digression here. So the first time that I actually met Peter was at a 24-hour or an overnight D&D session being led by a friend of ours at Anime North in Toronto. And this was done for a group, it was not live streamed, I don't think, but it was done for a room full of spectators who eventually made their input known so much that they were allowed to become a character by around 3 or 4 in the morning. And they took over the character of a lemon elemental.
Oh, amazing. Okay. That's so cool.
So, there's real opportunities for promotion in the chat is what I'm saying right now.
Yeah. And shout out to Jason Anarchy, the designer of the Drinking Quest games, who was the DM for that game, and the reason that I met Eric and then Moroki, and the reason that the story engine exists in its current form. Without him and his little piece of the story, we wouldn't all be here in this configuration. So thanks, Jason. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Jason Anarchy. Yes, and I guess I should have said that I would like to play a human sorcerer, please. I may be flesh, but my magic is powerful, and that renders me flesh of steel.
It's what's normally called a glass cannon.
Yeah.
Player D, have a dark past that pushes you towards good no matter what it takes.
All right.
Okay.
Cool. Oh man, I'm honestly pretty anxious about this third one. Political stuff, like I said, oh man, even world building it is tough, but I'll do my best.
I literally heard you say that, and then I was like, oh no.
Oh man.
Yeah.
It's like we gave Peter the antagonistic role. It's like one is just going to try to derail the session.
Yeah, well, I figured. So while you were saying don't love political intrigue, it's like, do I go and edit the document where we made our character personas, or do we? Yeah, we have a chance to navigate it in real time.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's do it. Cool. So, where would you get started for? Do you want to do stuff with Deck of Worlds first? Do you have any questions you want to ask us first as we dive into the world building process?
Yeah, I would say, okay, let's go through top to bottom. Miroki, you said that you liked magic, you like high fantasy, but you don't like the nitpicky sides of magic. You're not like one of those people who's like, oh, I need these specific spell components to make this thing happen, I'm guessing. How do you feel about the concept of like equivalent exchange, or like, obviously, you know, when it comes to games especially, there have to be some boundaries, but how do you feel about the concept of something going in order to make something coming out? Does that still feel okay to you, or is that like still icky?
So. There's like an alchemy element to it.
Yeah. Okay, solid, good. That gives me a good boundary to work within. And then Eric, you said you like just hitting things. Do you have any goals as a player or as a character? Do you have any particular creature that you want to fight that's on like your character's bucket list? Do you just want to get stronger ad infinitum? Like, what's your goal here?
I don't know if I have like a specific creature that's on my bucket list right now, but I do want to be the hero of something. I don't want to be like somebody's hired hand for doing their evil biddings. It's like, I want my side to be the side of right here. I want to be the knight in shining armor, except I'm a dwarf and maybe less shiny armor.
Okay, gotcha. And then Peter, for your sort of political intrigue sort of stuff, are you thinking about trying to work within like seeing a whole like combat map and a bunch of different political parties or interests or kingdoms and then choosing a side? Or do you have like, as a player, some specific mantra or code that you stick by and you want to see that spread to everywhere else in the world? Are you still like looking for a doctrine, or do you have one?
I think my character is probably looking for his place in the world, trying to like cement a foothold. I think that like early on in the character arc, I feel like he wants influence. He wants to be like recognized as a player at any cost. But I can imagine that like when he gets his foot in the door, he'll start to realize that like there is a cost to like having power, and he might start to maybe pick up some principles or like find something to believe in after the fact. Right now, I think the thing he wants is just power and influence, but I can imagine him wanting more than that, or wanting like an actual purpose for that power eventually. Yeah, I think the way that like I tap into political intrigue in this case is the reason I like political intrigue is I like when there's different power groups who have like agendas that are interesting and they can't all get what they want, and that puts them in natural conflict. That's the bit that I get excited about. So as long as there's that kind of like a confrontation of forces, and that's happening at a big scale like that, I'll be happy.
Gotcha. So like the morally gray, like not everyone can win here, but every side has like a positive and a downside. Okay, I like that. I think as a world builder, my goal, and especially as like a GM for all of you guys, would be to get you guys all at title at some point. And this is something that I think every GM should do, is to pay attention to their players' wants and needs and goals, and then try and make sure that at some point they accomplish that goal. And as a reward, you know, it could be physical, it could be like a brand new shiny axe for a barbarian friend, but it could also be something like, you know, the title Miroki, you know, Witch of the High Seas, or, you know, like something like that, where it's like you have this power and it's tied to your name fundamentally. That immediately increases player investment. For our lovely player D, the chat over here was talking about having just like an overwhelming dark past that pushes someone towards good. I know for a fact that that would kind of, again, lead in towards that morally gray type thing, right? Where it's like we want to make sure that whatever your concept of good is has some sort of downside still, or maybe you see it reflected in a BBG in a negative way. You know, this is something that I do quite often when it comes to building enemies in games, where I make sure that the enemy's end goal aligns with at least one player character's end goal, but it's been twisted in a way where it's like a dark reflection of yourself. So chat, while we're building this world a little bit and kind of building out the concepts here and drawing cards, if you guys want to think about what your actual end goal is, I'll try and work with that. And then from there, we can kind of start pulling cards, I guess.
Cool.
All right. It's funny because we were talking Witch of the High Seas and I immediately was like, oh, that's where our like coast expansion would come into play. We could have
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because I was thinking about our three characters and or four characters if we include chat, and thinking about how a region can start really agnostically, but as we get more granular, we might realize like how much does that world might play into someone who really wants magic or someone who's focused more on politics but doesn't want magic, and how do you find a way to make it all work for everybody, right? Or like, you know, someone who is maybe wanting to, like if you're looking at more fight and combat, but you know, the placing, taking the place of like a pacifist city or something, what does that all mean? And how do you kind of create some action for that? So I'm curious to see where this goes, is all that I'm saying.
Oh yeah.
So I've drawn 3 region cards. We could be in a bayou, some seafaring possibilities, a city, which this one appears to have a coast, or a river region.
Oh. Okay. I immediately like the concept of a river. Mostly because by definition, when it comes to world building, rivers tend to connect, like they're a thoroughfare, right? They tend to be less dangerous than traveling over land. It's a lot faster and you can get between cities really easily when it comes to rivers, but at the same time, it's a resource. And where this sort of initial political intrigue and this small scale strife that might evolve into large scale strife between kingdoms and between cities might come in is if maybe someone is building a dam upriver that then pulls resources from the downriver villages of a different kingdom. And so maybe we start off in this riverside like city or village where you guys are all from, and to kind of play into you know, the politics of it, the mayor of that town might approach you guys and be like, hey, we are having this issue where we're not having enough water for our crops. Not having enough water in the area also means that creatures who normally like are seeking out water sources are invading our town and digging up our wells and coming for our aquifers, coming for our reservoirs, and they're sort of encroaching on our land, which is where our barbarian friend might suddenly be tasked with the concept of fighting this non-native creature that comes in. And maybe at the same time, like these dry riverbeds unearth old bits of lore, like maybe there's fossils embedded in the mud that have some sort of innate magical property that our sorcerer's friend can start to kind of like pick at and start to unravel the mysteries behind and sort of develop a new form of magic that can be flavored however you want. With regards to the kind of good and evil that player D wants, our lovely chat, I would think about maybe trying to figure out why the upriver settlement has decided to build this dam, because inherently it might not be like, oh yeah, we just want to take water away from this downstream settlement. It's not that black and white. Instead, they might be building the dam because they need the water for some even more grand purpose. And you as a party have to figure out how to negotiate between the two towns, but also make sure that everyone gets what they want. And it's not endangering the upstream settlement and this other kingdom, or potentially sparking war by, kind of destroying their dam and just leaving it be.
I think there's like some of that play from other, and there's other like input as well, seeing the cultural changes of greater society and geography, and the game will end with a new era beginning. There's almost something to push towards that if you're like someone who's has a dark past, trying to do good, that it could chase you and it could like lead to really, really big kind of monumental changes near the end. So, I mean, I guess as we keep drawing cards, we're going to find out a little bit more. So I don't know if Eric, you want to pull our next landmark card.
I do like that we have one word so far and we managed to check.
I know. I was like, oh man, okay.
Well, we do this all the time, right? Because we say all these things and then we pull the next problem. We're like, oh, this went off.
Disregard everything we just
went off in a completely different direction. My goodness.
So we could have a library, a cave, and I'm going to draw 2 cards. A road or a lake.
Okay.
As our landmark.
It's pull the cards down a little bit, Eric, to make them more visible.
I like this. Do we want to have chat vote on this one?
Yeah, we can do. So
player D, it's up to you.
So chat. Yeah, we have library, cave, lake, and road. That could be a landmark on the river. So get your keyboards ready and we will vote in 3, 2, 1, go. I like the beaver folk of River of Dana.
I am here for beaver folk in pretty much any context.
I like the water park too. It's just like going down a very different rabbit hole.
hard to
Oh
burn
my
it down with
gosh.
all that water on hand, though.
Yeah, I become like High Witch of the Seas because I'm just like actually breaking the dam on the river and just letting river flow. Like
We are like perfectly split right now in the chat.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
This is a
very diverse
close,
chat
very-
today.
Yeah, very close vote.
Sometimes it's like a landslide. Are we close?
I think.
No.
Wait, though, did library get it? No, wait, we have cave.
I think
Yeah, 2 for cave, 2 for library, 2 for lake, 1
Oh,
for
no.
two for road.
Guys.
2 for road. We're tied 2, 2, 2, 2, 2.
But it could
So
be
next
the
vote
tiebreaker.
gets it.
Yeah.
I've never seen a chat be undivided before.
We usually get some pretty good landslides too. So this is we are not we are not of one mind, not today.
Oh man.
You guys are as diverse as the players who are coming to the table today.
Yeah, this is, I don't know. No one told me what to do in this scenario. What do we do? Do I roll a die or something?
I'm assuming someone's gonna vote.
There
We
we
had
go.
someone change their vote. There we go.
Okay, solid. So a road that conflicts with a river pretty heavily, but at the same time, it's kind of your only thoroughfare between these two areas now. If the river is dammed and you're not getting any water, you don't have any ships coming in and out, and you don't have any like commerce going between the two villages, the two settlements. And so the road suddenly becomes saturated with people who are trying to form fit previously their waterway type passages into an dry land type passage. So you start to see the roads become inherently more high risk. There's going to be more if we talk about the political intrigue side of it, there's going to be more communications happening along that road. People sending letters, but also people sending political missives, people sending maybe secret messages, encoded messages, something that only our little rogue can interpret if they come across someone, maybe a corpse along the side of the road that had a secret message that, they were robbed of everything except this message because the person who was robbing them couldn't read it. They didn't know its importance, but maybe you come across it and you're like, oh, this could change the landscape of these two settlements. For our barbarian friends, suddenly you might be tasked with the job of escorting a shipment from one settlement to the other. Maybe it's like a way to pick up some extra gold, fight some extra random creatures, and also secure yourself, some horses to get from one settlement upstream to the other in order to figure out what's going on. So you have this sort of bodyguard mission now. For a mage, it's a little bit harder. It's more along the lines of a mage for hire. You're traveling along a road now, so you have less resources because there's a lot more people who are doing hunting alongside this road. There's more people traveling back and forth. So maybe you can use your magic to kind of come up with some food or water, or, maybe you find shortcuts that other people haven't taken through your magic. It kind of depends on what flavor you want to take with it. If you want to be a sort of like navigational equal exchange type, yeah, sure, I can take this food and magic it into a 5-course meal for you. Like, oh, you found some mushrooms? Great. We now have mushroom smoothies for breakfast every morning, or something like that, where you're sort of the backbone of the resource side of it for a little bit.
What if I'm not just what if I don't want to be someone for just hire though? What if I want to be, I'm destined for bigger and better things?
Then I would say you have the opportunity to come across other mages along the road, and you might start to pick up on people who are kind of doing this like mage for hire type thing, or people who are separately investigating the two settlements. Maybe they have their own interests in mind. Maybe one of them really wants this dam built and they want the water taken away from the lower settlement. Maybe some people are from the lower settlement and they're like, hey, the lower settlement is pooling all their money and they've hired us to figure out what's going on. Maybe you just come across mages who are just traveling witches. They have magic items for sale. They have their own factions that they belong to. Maybe it's a group of like wizarding college type people. And maybe you can kind of find out details of all these sorts of walks of life, all these different schools of magic, and kind of pick a path from there and then do it better than everyone else you've come across so far. I feel like this would be your opportunity to come across like some archmage just in passing as a random encounter and kind of talk to them and form this new connection, have almost a mentor, but a remote mentor that you can just check in with every now and then and be like, hey, how's it going? I need some help with this thing. I feel like it'd be a good chance for you to form connections, in short.
I like how Wyvern brought up here about how last week's live stream we were talking about food culture.
Oh my God, I was so excited for that live stream.
And they were talking about how they were like, don't make magic food, because we were talking about how magic food probably all tastes like sawdust.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I think it was like it had the nutritional properties of whatever you used to make it. So it's like basically it's like you were basically eating rocks, I think was part of it.
Well, it's like this chicken, it's delicious. It's like a rock.
And not very nutritionally satisfying, shall we say.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I'm like I said I wasn't gonna be just a mage for hire, but I was like, wow, what if there's like a whole element where I'm saying I can magic food because everyone's struggling and they're hungry and they're waiting, and I'm like, I'll magic food, you can pay me, and it's like all shit food, and I'm like, bye.
Yeah.
It like looks good just long enough for me to get paid, and then I'm out of there.
Classic illusion magic. But speaking of food and world building, Chef Shane is recovered. He's back and cooking again, and he has rescheduled with us. So we are going to be doing that episode, talking to him about world building, colonialism, food culture on March 20th. And if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, last week's episode, we instead did a pivot. Maroki, who is a food and drink writer, guided us through her world experiences and how those could influence the process of world building. So we'll get to actually see two different takes on this conversation. So we're really excited to have Chef Shane back. We're excited that we got to have a first conversation of it, and we invite you back on March 20th for that live stream.
Yes, I'm very excited. I still always feel like Indigenous cuisine is this area that is still very unknown and unexplored in the food world, and even people who are curious about it still don't really like, even forget like in the writing and creative world, even the food world, people still don't really understand it. And there's so much ties, actually, since we're talking about magic, there's so much ties to like, medicine and culture and mystique in their history that I think Shane's gonna really share with us. And he was really excited. He like DM'd me the moment he started feeling marginally better and was like, I want to reschedule. So I was like, oh my God, I'm so like, that's so sweet. So I'm really glad he's doing better and is gonna join us again on the 20th. So thank you, Peter, for bringing that up. So I guess next up, we're pulling up a
namesake card.
Ooh.
Since we're talking about names and titles, Diana.
Mm-hmm.
So we have free of prayers of the flood or before the fall.
Ooh.
So it could be our river or our road.
Oh man. And remind me how namesake cards work. This is going to be like
free could be, for example, the free river or the free road. That one's going to come before. The others would all come after. So it could be, for example, the river of prayers or the road of prayers. The river before the fall, the road before the fall, the river of the flood, or the road of the flood.
Oh. I feel like calling it I feel like before the fall lends itself really well to that sort of like what one of our chat members, player D's, were talking about earlier, where it's the choices that you make have the potential to really shape the world. And so figuring out what the fall is going to be, it's almost like foreshadowing in a sense, where depending on what settlement you choose to help, that might shape in a butterfly effect sort of way the outcomes of the two kingdoms that are connected by this river, or what once was a river. If you don't have water downstream, you're going to have some problems with regards to what that village supplies to the rest of the kingdom. And then that might have downstream pun intended, effects on the the potential landscape. Like maybe if you don't have enough farmland supplied by the river and by that nutrient rich soil that comes from the river, maybe that impacts your border security along that side of the kingdom because you no longer have the resources to feed the military in that area. Maybe the mages of the area are called on to kind of supply food that tastes like sawdust in place of actual food, and it impacts morale. Maybe that morale change inspires people to kind of defect over to the other kingdom and then carry their secrets across the border, and maybe our lovely rogue has to choose what to do from there. Maybe there's some new like skirmishes happening at the border that get interrupted by monsters every now and then that are attracted to the fallen bodies and the smell of blood, and our barbarian friend is hired to come in and kind of level the playing field a little bit. And maybe you're pulled in two different directions where you're trying to figure out what side you want to fight on. And it might not be your end goal. If you just want to hit things, maybe you don't feel great about being almost conscripted into this war that isn't yours. But as it escalates, you're going to find your talents being like called upon. You have to figure out what to do from there in a very simple sort of sense. At the end of the day, they're both offering you fancy goods and new things to fight. So you just have to pick which one you like best.
I find caravan security to be a very noble and worthy calling, at least for now.
Nice. I love. So we're going with Road Before the Fall or River Before the Fall?
I think River Before the Fall sounds good.
Because I'm thinking, this is Peter now injecting himself into my
Please
character
do.
as player C. I love prophecies and I love ambiguous prophecies. So if it's called The River Before the Fall, it's connected to some kind of prophecy about an event that's going to happen, like a fall that could happen. Then I would find that really interesting. I think my rogue would be very interested in like getting information and secrets about that. And if the prophecy is connected to any kind of magic, then that'd be a fun way for me to jam with player A, where we're like trying to figure out the magical mystery of the prophecy together, and I'm looking at the political side, the movers and shakers, and if you're interested, player A, you could be like the magical consultant who's figuring out the like what kind of clairvoyant magic was used, or to like tap into the mysteries as a seer or something.
Oh yeah.
There's definitely a moment where I'm like very eagerly trying to figure out how these three characters come together. Like I'm like definitely a huge fan of like the merry band of adventurers, and figuring out it's like they're all coming from maybe the same area or slightly different places, and how do they come together? How do they clash together? Why are they now traveling together, and how do those things align? I'm also, one thing I'm finding fascinating is almost how quickly our characters are developing and changing as this world is being developed. Like I think the sense I got from player B before was like this character's like, I want to be simple, bang, fun adventure. But now there's going to be this like whole in-depth thing of being like, you know, like dragged into something that is, you know, against your desires, and you're going to discover like your higher purpose and calling. And that was like a layer of complexity and character development I didn't expect to see. What I had for player A was like, you know, especially as like the human sorcerer, I want to be a mage, I want to be so cool, I want to be so like epic and powerful, you know, like these characters that I admire, like Scarlet Witch. It's like suddenly I'm just like doing illusion tricks for dimes and dollars on like the ground. It's really interesting how that shifts based on this world that we're starting to create.
Which lends itself to like a breaking point where you guys eventually come full circle and go back towards like your original calling and have that sort of character fulfillment moment in a new skin. I would also say when it comes to the concept of Before the Fall, it could be the literal name of the river in the sense that it used to be up ahead of a waterfall further downstream. And
I had that thought.
Yeah. And so now that maybe, especially if you started off in this original settlement player A, and you found in these dry lake beds and river beds like hints of magical essences that hadn't been discovered before, maybe the missives that you intercept and this concept of this prophecy of being before the fall leads you back downstream towards where this waterfall used to be. And now that the river's been dammed and dry, there's something behind it or buried in the sediment that is ancient, it's magical, it has some sort of secret that you'd be the first to discover, player A, and then player B, maybe it's guarded by something that previously hasn't woken up because it hasn't been dry enough to wake up in several centuries. So it could be a kind of dual meaning in a sort of sense. I think it'd be fun.
The prophecy could be about
like
what
that.
happens
Lots
if
of
the river
opportunities
dries
there.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, since we're talking about sort of things that might wake up or not, we can find out whether something used to sleep in the river or in the riverbed or at the end of the waterfall with the origin card.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay.
So, was this region a former desert?
Oh, that's the waking thing, the dry
Was
thing.
it the site of an epic betrayal?
That's the dark past thing.
Was it polluted by somebody erased from memory?
That could be
Political
dark.
history, political intrigue.
Or was it seceded from a larger territory?
Oh, interesting.
That could be a fight thing for you.
I almost want to go with all three of those first three at once. Like it really does, it lends to everything. Oh man. So we could say, can we do all three? Is that cheating?
So we can do something we do called the corner tuck, where you tuck it so that two of them show. So visually you can keep two of them visible at the same time and like double tap. We have not found we could kind of do that with three if you put it at a diagonal in the corner.
You basically have to do something like this. Yeah. I think that we can do it.
Yeah,
That's kind of cool.
We just checked.
We have discovered the triple tuck, the triple
tuck.
corner tuck. Diana is today in helping us invent a whole new way of tucking.
I'll invoice you guys later for the concept. Okay, so we have this area by the waterfall was a former desert. It was the site of an epic betrayal. So maybe the betrayal is what locked away that creature in the first place centuries ago. And maybe that kind of lends itself to Oh man, maybe that's why the kingdoms are suddenly damming the river further upstream, is because they and only they know what happened with this creature's origin story. And so our political rogue here is trying to kind of like gather secrets, unravel what happened, and despite coming from the lower kingdom, kind of trying to infiltrate the upper kingdom enough to find out what they know. And maybe the upper kingdom is like, hey, if we dam this river and we dry it up again and we restore it to its former desert type, what they consider to be its former state, then this creature wakes up again. And then, we have to go fight it again. And maybe that's something where it's like basically a way of combating the lower kingdom from the inside by turning their own environment and their own dinosaurs functionally against them. But maybe that creature's weakness is the magic that you discover as player A, as the mage, who's kind of like unearthing how this thing originally got locked away in the first place.
I would like to know how to be able to sneak attack it, so I would rely on you for that information as our magical diagnostics person.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe somebody erased from history founded the lower village, and the reason that person was erased was because they knew the secret.
Oh yes, that's such a good idea. Oh, I love that.
It's all
There's
coming
also,
together.
Since we're talking about One Piece, and One Piece is probably going to get a lot of references all through the live stream series because Eric and I finally got caught up on the series, which means there's a lot of recency effect there. But there's like this whole thing in One Piece where they have to find these like blocks of ancient language called like poneglyphs, where it like kind of helps them map out things. And there's like this whole thing about like a whole past era that was erased as well. But maybe as like, if you're damming it up and things are getting dry, that's when it's also revealing a lot of like ancient and old scripture around it as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we don't know what to do with this, so we're just going to bury it underneath a waterfall.
Oh, yeah.
That is where secrets are always hidden in video games. Every video game, there's always a secret behind the waterfall.
Exactly what I was thinking. It's like a nice little classic, like, I knew it moment for the players.
Yeah.
I would also say, coming back around to player D, who said that they have a dark past that pushes them towards good no matter what it takes. Maybe it could be a stain on family history that is tied back to this person who was erased from history. Like maybe it's something along the lines of like they were erased from history and the public reason for that happening is actually completely false. And so you're kind of trying to clear your family name. Something a little bit personal to tie it in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Speaking of player D, we could have player D vote on the attribute card queue.
Yay.
Get a little chat involvement going.
All right. Well, we'll see if we need another triple tuck here.
That would require a triple tie on chat's part. Why are you?
I was trying to remember if this is the one we used last week, but I don't think it was. I didn't
necessarily shuffle our decks.
I don't always shuffle the decks as often as I should.
Mine only get shuffled because I put them away just like as a mess in a single like box in my apartment. So
is this place religiously diverse? Is it known for carnivorous plants? Barbarian says yes. Does it have seasonal flooding, or is it known for street food?
Oh my god, I could go for some street food right now.
Eric, do you want to walk us through what the keywords are for the vote?
Our keywords are going to be plants, flooding, street food, or religion. 3, 2, 1, go.
Can you scooch the card down just a little bit? The top queue is not visible. Perfect.
The thing about being religiously diverse is that would make it interesting because you could have like the upper region being of one religion and the lower region being a different region. And they say diverse, which always sounds positive, but we could also say that diversity causes conflict.
Barbarian is happy.
Oh, the plants. I didn't even finish talking about religious intrigue, and they're like, nah, the plants. The plants.
It's like,
I hear you, but have you considered big plant go chump?
It's like, have you considered that the best vegetables are the ones you have to kill? The best vegetables are actually just animals.
Oh, man. Okay, I'm going to be a bio nerd for a second. For those who don't know, my degree is in zoology, and I have minors in like chemistry and psychology, professional sales, a bunch of random stuff. And the fun thing about biology is it's all based on trophics and like the whole food pyramid type thing. And rivers are usually really important. The reason that we set up farms historically around rivers is because they carry sediment along with the water that is super nutrient rich. So it's really good for plants. when you take away those nutrients, those plants have to get nutrients somewhere else or die trying, which means there's a sudden increase of carnivorous plants simply because the plants have nowhere else to turn. And maybe there's some mage out there, someone who is like almost a druid in a sense, who's just trying to almost cultivate these carnivorous strains of plants just to make sure that they can still survive in this returning desert environment. And it's absolutely wreaking havoc on the people traveling up and down this road. And so you're kind of tasked with the morally gray issue of this druid is trying to save the local environment by getting the plants to adapt to a new food source, but that new food source is people, and it's really hard to like justify that. So that's where my mind instantly goes towards.
And actually, just because you've brought it up, and I am not a trained bio nerd, but I am an aspiring bio nerd. We released last year the Deck of Worlds Expanded Guidebook, which is like bonus play modes for Deck of Worlds. And it includes an ecosystem thing where we actually walk you through setting up trophic layers for your ecosystem using Deck of Worlds and some rolling tables for animals.
I love this so much. It sings to my heart.
Ecosystems, yeah. So you can roll for some evolutionary pressures that are affecting your ecosystem. You can figure out who your primary producer is, giving them both a trait and a type. Your herbivore, your omnivore, and your carnivore, and then a wild card species, because there's a bunch of stuff that was hard to represent in simple trophic layers that can be really fun to do, to play around with it and make it a little bit different. So if you want some support on creating trophic layers in your ecosystem, you can find the Deck of Worlds Expanded Guidebook on the website in the PDF section.
Amazing.
Yes, it is a PDF only product, and I actually think it's I actually am familiar with rivers and sediments, so like my food and wine nerdness, wine is kind of my big specialty, and wine talks a lot about terroir, and we talk about alluvial fans all the time with river and sediment because terroir and like drawing up minerals. And hilariously, grapes are notoriously lazy, and if you actually put them in a nutrient rich and like very like wet area, the roots just lay on the surface and they just suck up water. Now you just get fat, bloated grapes that don't taste good. So you actually want them in soils that struggle. Because when they struggle, the roots will dig deeper into the soil for nutrients. And that's where it captures all the minerals and then that's when you get like the sense of terroir in the grapes, because that's when you can taste like the clay, the lime soil, the slate, or, you know, the fossils. That is what makes that region unique. Like Chablis is land that sits on like 4 million year old seashells. So you get a lot of chalky salinity in the wines that you drink. But you need them to struggle. So it's actually funny. So it's like I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh, these grapes could be really, really great in this area with no nutrients, but then they turn carnivorous.
So what you're telling me is that we just kind of started with Venus flytraps, and while the ecosystem was healthy, they were happy with flies. But now basically they've just got to get bigger and bigger and meaner because there's just not enough food in the area.
Oh man, I love that. So there's like a brand new like wine market that you guys are going to be like absolutely crushing if you go in and restore this river.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know. They were grapes that turned to Venus flytraps, or maybe these like giant carnivorous plants still have grapes on them. You just have to survive the harvest.
Your sorcerer can be a grape witch.
Yeah.
There's literally a restaurant in Toronto called Grape Witches, or wine agent. There you go. Witch of the high grapes.
Did you see the pun?
No.
The barbarian. You get grapes.
So one thing is like I puns get me in a way that I can't. I can't with puns, so people love punning me. My God.
Aww.
Some would say that player D's player species in D&D is a troll.
Amazing.
Please stop.
Shall we get to an advent card?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is what's about to happen in this world.
I don't think we actually. Maybe I should do that thing that we do when we've been using Deck of Worlds for 30 minutes, which is to introduce what it is.
Yeah.
In case you haven't seen Deck of Worlds before, Deck of Worlds is our deck of world building prompts. You can come up with little areas called micro settings, which will have a rich fabric that details that bring together their ecology and their culture, the people who live there, the past. There's 6 card types in Deck of Worlds. We draw the region first to establish our main terrain type for the region, our main biome. Then we draw a landmark card to give it a point of interest. We draw a namesake card to add a little fragment of a nickname to either the region or the landmark to give it just a little bit of like, ooh, where did that name come from? Get the lore brain awake and thinking. We draw an origin card to give it a little piece, a detail from its past. We give it the attribute card to give it a detail from its present. And then the advent card is a coming change that could affect its future. So we don't have locations that are frozen in time. They're actually changing and evolving naturally. And the advent card in particular is usually a good plot hook for bringing in the players in a D&D campaign, or for finding where your protagonist is going to get connected to the world through the story if you're writing a novel. That's why advent cards can be a lot of fun, and that's what we'll draw now. Thank you for letting me do this thing I should have done 30 minutes ago.
It's okay. There's always a good mid I don't know what it is, mid draw pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a workers' strike is shutting down the area due to a recent incident, long-standing conditions, or a charismatic leader. Or an unknown disease is decimating the ecosystem. A plant blight, a brain parasite, or a fungal spore. One of those things is not like the other.
Yeah, goodness. I could go with any of those, honestly. I feel like one of my favorite plot hooks ever is something to do with like any sort of disease kind of popping up, especially because you have to find the root cause of a disease more so than you have to find a root cause of things that you would normally find in a tabletop game, right? Like if bodies go missing, you know, you just figure out where they're going, what cave, you know, you track them back to, and you kill the monster inside and you're good. When it comes to diseases, you can't just, they don't have HP. You can't just go into battle against like a brain parasite as easily. You have to find out what's causing it. So maybe these arid conditions, these dried up riverbeds, these dry conditions are favorable to whatever blight, whatever parasite, whatever fungal spore is kind of like permeating the area. And no one quite traces it back to the water shortage. The water shortage has been going on for so long. It's just a way of life now. But maybe for our characters who are entering this area for the first time or hearing about this uprising of this disease for the first time, they are the first ones to really put the pieces together and trace it back to the dry riverbed and be like, okay, well, why is the riverbed dry? And then they trace it back to the grander conflict and it just grows from there. So localized problem, regional solution.
See, this is going to be where Moroki is injecting her personal opinion to player A. Is I would say that the one storyline that usually doesn't intrigue me, or it like icks me, I think, is Contagion. Like,
really?
Yeah, I find like Contagion films, Contagion movies, like anything that has that can't control, can't fight it, invisible illness element is usually a storyline that I don't always want to participate in, because I think there's a little bit of that, like you can't see it. It's gonna, and I also think maybe there's a part of me that's like always like feels like it brings out the worst in human nature. Like when you know when you have these crises that people can't just see and fight, that's where a lot of strife happens, and this is where you can see humanity get their darkest. You know, when you see them like raiding facilities, raiding each other, that whole distress of like watching your loved one die, like zombie films. I am like zombie shows. I'm not about it, because there's something about the whole like you see your loved one like die and turn into something you have to kill, bothers me in a really deep intrinsic way. So I would love to see like how it's like where does the mage kind of find, I guess, like purpose and joy and desire to be a part of this, because now it's not about like a sleeping creature anymore. Now it's about this like thing that might decimate large populations.
It's like the barbarian is okay with it as long as like the disease has some kind of root cause that I can hit, whether that means there's like a slumbering plague dragon, or like the little infections are like all like kinds of like little germs, but there's one giant germ. So basically like the monster is just like a giant bio model from like chemistry class. I'm okay with either of those scenarios.
Maybe we could. Oh yeah, go ahead, Pete.
I was just to throw you a curveball and make you do some like above the table DMing conflict management work. I was gonna say like, but I really like the idea of some kind of like unearthed plant disease or plant pathogen or some kind of secret spore that comes up. And that's something that I do want to see. How would you walk us through deciding how to world build here, or what?
It's not always about you, player C.
It's not always about you, player A.
So maybe we could say, and I'm going to do my best to put all these together here. Maybe we could say that initially this disease or this contagion comes from the droppings of a creature. And this creature is not usually a problem. It doesn't usually exist in this area, except for the fact that it really likes the fact that it's really abhorrent or abhorred by water. And so maybe now that the riverbed is dry, this creature is coming back and you have more of these droppings everywhere. And you're tasked with kind of like clearing out the nests because that's the apparent root cause at first. But then you're like, oh, well, why is it here in the first place? And that kind of leads you up the river. At the same time, before you realize that it's there, before the village realizes that it's because of these droppings left behind by this animal that doesn't usually exist here, maybe they initially blame the settlement up the river. And they're like, oh, they've hated us for forever. Like, you know, they never liked us, but it's biological warfare. And that kind of like, even though it's not the initial answer, it kind of it sets the stage for that tension between the two kingdoms and the two villages. And then as far as the magic goes, I would say we can kind of like, as a DM, when it comes to the concept of a player just straight up not liking the concept of contagion and not enjoying the concept of like looting or riots or the human evil that comes from it, that's where safety tools kind of come into play. We can maybe just like say, okay, yeah, no worries. This is just the introductory plot hook. We'll move past it as quickly as we can. And I promise within 1 or 2 sessions, you'll be fighting something fleshy as opposed to fighting human evil.
I suppose the other way of doing it, the first thing on that card is plant blight. So maybe it's like they find all this poo that they're using as fertilizer, but it turns out it's the wrong kind of poo and the plants don't like it and it turns into evil and carnivorous.
I like that.
So it doesn't have to be a human disease, I suppose.
And it makes sense that it's the plant blight that has a root cause.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
oh goodness.
That's why I dislike player C so much.
really had to dig for that pun.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
We'll have PvP at my table. It's okay.
Amazing. Cool. Well, look at that. We in less than an hour, we went from having some players who had a jumble of unrelated goals for what they wanted to having a world that we built cogently together, and ways of making sure that we all get what we want from that world and from the time that we would spend role-playing. That is super cool. So thank you so much for walking us through this process. I really appreciate you. Like, there's what was the term? I can't remember where I first heard it. The term vulnerable expert, being a vulnerable expert. Someone who's like really good at something and learning about something, but willing to put themselves in position of like having to learn in front of people or practice in front of people and do it in a way that shows like it's a process, you figure it out. So thank you for being our vulnerable expert. That was really, really wonderful.
Yeah, of course. This is so much fun. I like being put on the spot nowadays. It's cool.
And I know that you're doing a lot of sort of showcasing the creative process of world building on your new podcast. Could you tell us a little bit about Worlds Apart?
Yeah, so if you like what we did literally just now, that's all Worlds Apart is. It's me and my friend Odie, also known as Odin's son on all platforms. And we just got together one day. He just messaged me and he's like, hey, I kind of want to do a podcast where we do a bunch of world building and then we run a bunch of games in those worlds with all of our content creator friends, all of these AP performers and, people that you know and love from the tabletop space. And so every episode, Odin and I sit down for about an hour or so and we just riff exactly like this. In fact, I expect that the deck of worlds and the story engine in general is going to make an appearance, if not several, down the road, where we take a grand concept and we'll go back and forth and we're just like, oh, okay, we want to world build a disease. Okay, great. Well, what does it infect? Oh, great. How does it spread? Where does it come from? What do we do when it stops like spreading the way it should? Does that pave the way for some new threat? What is the party going to do when they run into it? Where does it take place? And it's very much like taking one tiny concept and spiraling out from there. So that is Worlds Apart. We just released our second episode this past Tuesday, and it's a bi-weekly podcast available on all platforms. But YouTube is where you can watch it as well as listen to it. So I always recommend YouTube. But of course, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, I think Pandora, Amazon Podcasts, I'm pretty sure. Just like so everything. Yeah. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can hear our wonderful voices. And also it's a lot of joking around as well. We're pretty good friends. We keep it relaxed. It's just mostly for funsies. And then we can't wait to get to the part where we actually play some games in the world that you watched us build. So I'm stoked for it.
Oh, I love that. And I think like one of the things I really admired you for while going through this process with you is watching you take like this world. And I think this is the thing that I think a lot of people can gain just from listening to you talk and listen to you world build and listening to your podcast is how you take something that if you just like built the world and didn't know what your characters were what your players were interested in, what their things, you could go off and do your own thing. And like that's the thing about building micro settings or building characters, is that without input from other people, you could go off in one completely direction. But because you knew each of us as players, you actually were able to find a way to take this little micro setting and connect it to each of us. And I think that wouldn't have been the case if there was no one there like offering that kind of feedback. And you did it really, really effortlessly. That's why I want to call it out, because I think sometimes when you do that effortlessly, people almost forget like that this takes work and this takes skill and this takes consideration of the people around you. And you clearly are an expert of it. But I think it's like that's the thing. That's the thing. I think everyone who is looking at DM doing player-driven world building and looking at working in a more collaborative setting with their players, to have the ability to do that active listening and find a way to integrate that into the settings you build and still make it a really seamless and dynamic world. It's not like you were forcing this world. It's not like none of this ever felt like you were like, trying to just bend like an iron rod to fit around the character's desires. So there were times you acknowledge that maybe it was like a little bit difficult, especially at the beginning, like why that connected to the mage per se, but then the layers unfolded and you were able to come up with new concepts for how that integrated to like player A's desires, or how something integrated with player B's desires, or even player D's, the chat. So I just really want to commend you for that. And I think like people are trying to find ways of making it as effortless as you. I think listening to your podcast is probably going to really help them along.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's what I try and make most of my content about as well, is to try and walk people through the processes. So I promise it's easier than it looks. Follow me for more, I guess.
Yeah, you can find Diana at Diana of the Rose on all social media and on YouTube. And yeah, if you are in the replay crew who's watching this after we've recorded, go ahead and share something that you learned or that you'd like to integrate into your game from watching Diana operate as a sort of player-driven world builder, collaborative world builder. Love to hear what lessons you took away.
Yeah, and for people who maybe like are players as well, just like whether this, maybe might like wake in a new desire to do a little bit of DMing. Like maybe you want to be the one creating a little bit of worlds now, if that's kind of changed your perspective at all, or, even as like a DM or GM, if there's things that you're looking at discovering, or even more questions that you have to get deeper into that, like you can write that into the replay as well. Like I'm sure we'd be happy to relay those questions to Diana. You can always share it on like one of your future podcast episodes or something. I think like it was a lot of learning for me today. So I'm sure that anyone's watching the replay or even have questions afterwards, we certainly invite them if you have a moment to reflect and come back with more.
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah, that's where I got all of my content ideas is from you guys. So thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Send questions my way.
And one thing we should say, we focused a lot on RPGs today, but if you are a writer, like this exercise, like all that stuff about getting outside your own head is really, I think, applies here, because this is just a fun exercise to do. Doesn't necessarily have to go anywhere, but it will like kind of just give you some new things, some new avenues to go down and see what other people are interested in too.
Yeah, and if you want some more experience as a writer working or writing collaboratively, I'll just quickly mention our next episode as we continue the Story Engine Workshop series is going to be with George Straighton, who is a Hollywood producer and screenwriter, and he's going to be actually running a live writer's room for us next week. So you'll get to vote on which genre we're going to do, and then we're basically going to write a TV pilot together. The chat will be able to contribute ideas. He'll talk about how you manage different writers in a writer's room, how you cast a writer's room so that you have different writing strengths present, and how you coordinate all those efforts to make sure that you get a cogent product at the end of that. So again, we'll see a different look at what it's like to world build or to create or to write collaboratively, and different ways of managing different creative inputs in different directions, and how that can get something totally different than you'd ever create on your own. So come join us next week at 3 p.m. Eastern for George Straighton. We'd love to have you all back. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us at the Story Engine Workshop series. This was a delight as always. Thank you, chat, for all of your observations, for your participation as player D. If in some future timeline, maybe we get to do a strange game in this world where the chat is collectively controlling a character and spitting out all their actions in rapid succession.
It'll be like that.
What a nightmare.
It'll be like that Twitch stream where everybody was playing Pokemon.
Pokemon, yeah. The Reddit plays Pokemon, yeah.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So basically, it was like somebody like had the original Pokemon game, and then but it was like a in real time thing. So it was like a whole collective of people trying to like play through the game, but anybody could submit an input for what was being played. So if like 3 people hit up at the same time, the character would go up like 3 moves. And so the chat was like trying to collectively get through all of Pokemon by committee. And it was like, it took them a long time. Like, it was like a lot of like backtracking and like people overlapping. And
it basically
like
depends on how much chat can operate as hive mind versus today, which was like of many minds.
Yeah.
But that's also, it was the many minds that made this particular setting so rich and have so many different elements to it. So
yes,
we love it. All right, well, thank you all so very much. We'll see you next week, 3 p.m. Eastern. Thank you again, Diana. Really, really wonderful to have you here.
Thanks for having me. This is so much fun.
We'll catch you all in the next one. Bye. I do it.